to speak on this subject is that I have myself consumed technology as a customer. I participated or actively drove several major technology implementations over the course of my career, many of them in financial services, as you'll see mentioned there, and I have the scars to prove it. I'm quite familiar from those experiences with some of the issues and challenges that relate to implementing and using technology. And I did that for some number of years before I became a financial and business analyst in this business, in the technology industry itself. So I have a perspective on both sides of the fence, if you will. Now, here's what we want to cover with you today. First of all, we want to give you a definition of cloud computing because there are a lot of definitions out there. It's helpful, I think, to just sort of understand what cloud computing is and isn't. I want to give you an understanding of what the driving business rationale is for the cloud and really what the financial and business case is for using the cloud. I want to outline for you some of the key risks that you need to be aware of in terms of cloud computing. And also really dive into how specifically the cloud and its potential impacts senior management, particularly from two perspectives, those being if you're a CIO or a CFO. And I want to give you, following that, a concrete example of the financial and business case, if you will, for migrating a part of, in this case, it'll be an ERP system from an on-premises sort of environment into the cloud. And then I'll close out with some final thoughts, things that I think you'll want to be aware of at a high level in terms of looking forward and making the most out of cloud computing. So let's get underway now. You know, it's almost impossible these days to have missed the buzz around cloud computing. You go practically anywhere and you'll notice that there's all kinds of information about cloud computing, and you'll also notice that there's usually very big numbers associated with how big cloud computing is and is going to be. In this example, it's the Wall Street Journal saying that the cloud computing market in Germany by 2015 is going to be 8.2 billion euros in size. You know, if you look at what, for example, the Gartner Group, a very respected research organization in the technology field, is saying, this is more historical at this point, but they projected enterprise application software, which is a subset of overall cloud computing, to be nearly 10 billion in 2010. Actually ended up being a little bit bigger than that. They also projected, and you'll see these numbers being pretty consistent across the board, that cloud computing, in terms of the money businesses spend on cloud computing, growing at anywhere between 16 to 20% per year. Now those are significant numbers to begin with, and it's a significant growth rate, far outstripping what businesses are spending in traditional forms of software. This is one of the highest estimates I've seen. You'll see in this slide that they're projecting here that the global cloud computing market is expected to be by 2015 over $100 billion in size, and its growth rate to be something over 26%. Now, different analysts will have different views of how big the market's going to be and how fast it's going to grow, but the point is that they're all saying it's substantial. And if you look, in fact, at companies that are active in the cloud computing space, the NetSuites of the world, the Salesforce.coms of the world, as an example, you'll find that their revenues are actually growing at between 16 and 20%. So it's clearly happening. Now, let's just start, if we could, with a clear definition, at least from my perspective, of what cloud computing really is. There's the what and the why. Now, the what is that really cloud computing, you want to think of them as just applications that are delivered as services. So it's another word for it is software as a service. And the upside of that, the positives, the good thing about that is that if it's available as a service, it's always available. You can scale it up or down as you need. Your organization grows, you can add computing power. Your organization it doesn't grow or shrinks in size, you can pare it back. It's there when you need it. It's just in time. It's run on shared industry standard hardware, so it costs less. And it's billed on a pay-as-you-consume basis. So you subscribe for it, really, and you only pay for what you need and what you consume. That's the what. Now, there are a couple of reasons that this is important, and first of all, it accelerates the speed at which you can put a technology solution in place. You can gain the availability of a particular software application far more rapidly in a cloud computing environment than you can if you have to physically buy computer hardware and install software and get it running and getting integrated with your other systems, all those kinds of things. So it's far, far faster to access. It also lowers your TCO. Now that's industry speak for total cost of ownership. That's another way of saying it costs less. And because it costs less, because cloud computing costs less, it allows for more of your budget, your technology budget, to be allocated towards innovation, things that drive better business results and better business performance versus maintenance of technology, which doesn't necessarily, unfortunately, always drive better performance. So that's really what we say, what we mean when we say cloud computing. Now, at a structural level, I want to give you an understanding of sort of 3 layers of cloud. This is, I don't know what the word for a multi-layered cloud is, cumulonimbus or something, I think. But there are really 3 layers that, that I want to explain quickly. There's first of all infrastructure as a service, and that in the industry is called IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And really, this is the basic data storage, the hosting, services that relate to, to having your files not necessarily on your physical premises or on servers that are in your business, but stored in a cloud, stored offsite. And being able to access them and hosting different kinds of software, different applications you may use to run your business. That is the base layer. That's called infrastructure as a service. The next layer built on top of that is what's called platform as a service, and this contains elements of mobility devices, iPhones and other smartphones, the devices you access wirelessly and remotely. Platform as a service also involves being able to develop business applications that are designed to be used exclusively in the cloud, as opposed to on hardware that's located on your business, physically on your premises. Platform as a service also relates to the various elements of tying all of these different pieces of cloud computing elements together, integrating them, billing for them, providing the adequate levels of security that obviously is needed in order for them to be useful at all. That's platform as a service. And then built on top of platform as a service, which in its turn is built on top of infrastructure as a service, is what's called software as a service. Oh, and I just noticed that should be S rather than SaaS rather than PaaS. But and these are really business applications, ERP or accounting software, CRM or customer relationship management software, business intelligence software, other business applications that you use on a day-to-day basis, supply chain management software, for example, that you use to run your business. So there are those really those 3 layers in the cloud that you need to be aware of in terms of what you can shift in the way of technology that you today consume on premises on your business into some form of cloud-based consumption model. Now, here's what it really comes down to if you really get down to the fundamental business rationale behind cloud computing. And here's the analogy I like to draw. If you think about it, there was a time when each business, in order to exist, had to produce its own electricity. There was a time when each, household, I guess, in order to have electricity, had to produce their own. And if businesses today consumed electricity the same way they consume software, what you'd have is every business with its own power plant, with its own generator. And this would mean you'd have to tie up scarce capital in these generators. You'd have to maintain them over their useful life, whatever that was. So you'd have expenses associated with keeping them current and keeping them in working condition. And then when their useful life was over, you'd have to replace them. And the big downside of that is that it obviously is only available for the very largest of enterprise in anything approaching a reasonable cost, or at anything approaching a reasonable cost. You can't get the benefit of any economies of scale as a small to medium-sized business if you were to be responsible for managing or for generating your own power. It would be simply too expensive. Now, cloud computing, if you will, sort of shifts that around, and it's really about consuming software or information technology more generally as a utility, much as electricity today is consumed as a utility. You turn it on when you need it, you turn it off when you need it, you consume what you use, and you pay only for what you consume. So it's subscription based. You don't have to, in a cloud computing model, you don't have to involve yourself necessarily with a big implementation times, the setup of or getting access to the computing that you need or to the applications that you need is typically available with minimal setup and therefore with far less cost. The second thing about the subscription model is that you only pay for what you use. If you need to add users to a particular application, for example, you pay for them, and if you don't need to, you don't pay for them. So you only use what you need, which means you can use more or use less as your business grows or doesn't, and it's there when you need it. The other thing that's very important about cloud computing, and this is especially important for the CFO, is that it keeps capital available for investments that directly generate revenue. There's a lot of capital tied up in hardware equipment and in the maintenance of various forms of technology in businesses today that could, many feel, especially in this current economic climate, be better used towards generating revenue. And so in a cloud computing model, you keep capital available for these revenue-generating investments by avoiding all of the external services and internal, not all of them, but some of them, internal IT staff or software licenses that you do if you consume software in an on-premises or traditional sort of fashion. And at the end of the day, what that means is that you have more capital available, you have lower costs, you have scalability, you use only what you need. And you also have lower risk in the sense that you don't have to worry so much about technology going out of date because pretty much by definition, if you're consuming software in the cloud, it's always current. You don't have to worry about replacing it. It's being continuously upgraded and updated for you as part of the subscription. That's the fundamental rationale behind cloud computing, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. At the end of the day, it's about consuming software or information technology more generally as a utility, just as you today consume electricity. Any business consumes electricity. Now, there are some other benefits to cloud computing as well. The first is that it provides what we sort of refer to as an innovation sandbox. That is, because you're not devoting resources to the maintenance of technology, you're able to devote resources towards experimentation with software and applications and functionality that can actually grow your business or more effectively manage costs, because you have access to computing horsepower that you'd otherwise never be able to afford. Computing horsepower, if you're talking about buying servers and physical equipment, is expensive. And for most businesses, there's a limit to what you can afford, and there's a limit, therefore, to what you can innovate with and experiment with in terms of really driving better business results. In the cloud, you have access to a whole bunch of computing power that you could otherwise never afford, and you can use that to drive productive business experiments. It also, in terms of a benefit, really levels the playing field because a lot of software, in particular business applications, because they required rather expensive systems to run on, and because they required very expert technical resources to maintain, really they were out of the reach of, in many cases, small and medium-sized businesses. They could benefit from these complex systems. They would more effectively help them run their business, but they couldn't afford them simply because they didn't have the resources that a large enterprise does or did to spend on them. So cloud computing allows, in many ways, small and medium-sized businesses to be on the same level playing field as larger businesses because it shrinks the cost and makes the cost of consuming various forms of technology more affordable for the small to medium-sized business. Another key benefit is that cloud computing allows you to be far more agile and adaptable in terms of how you use technology. The reality is that you can, in a cloud computing model, try different things. If you think it's going to be useful for your business, you can give it a try. Most times you can have some form of test experience or trial drive experience, if you will. And you can buy what works. You can subscribe to it if it happens to be delivering value to you, or you cannot if it doesn't. And a final sort of cloud benefit is that it often allows you to generate more revenue because it's now more cost effective. You can access it more affordably on a subscription basis than if you had to. For example, install a complex customer relationship management system on premises. Many times that would just be unaffordable, whereas in a cloud computing model, it's not only affordable, but it's easily accessible. The same to a degree is true of call center software, for example. That can be consumed in a cloud format now and allow you to grow revenue. So that's a final sort of major cloud benefit. Now, I wanted to just sort of put a little bit of perspective on something that's referred to often in the industry, at least, as the consumerization of IT. And really, this is just to give you a sense of how pervasive cloud computing really is. In a business context, it's still, in a business context, not every business has yet fully embraced cloud computing, because it's not yet really taken its place in the mainstream of how a business operates. But it certainly has done that in many ways at a consumer level, and that means that it's pushing businesses to accommodate this. The cloud is here, is the fact of the matter. I mean, if you think about it, how many of us do not have some form of internet-based or cloud-based email access, whether it's Hotmail, Gmail, whatever. How many of us are shopping on eBay these days? I don't know what the exact numbers are, but there's millions of transactions certainly that happen there on a daily basis. Most of us will be totally comfortable using online banking. In fact, we do it almost on a daily basis, and the pervasiveness of smartphones, whether they're BlackBerries or iPhones or whatever you have, it's almost getting to the point where none of us can imagine living without this technology. We're already in the cloud as consumers, and we're already in the cloud in a major way. And we're also expecting that businesses, therefore, as people who work in companies, we're expecting that companies accommodate our desire to be connected in the cloud, each and every day and almost each and every moment. So the cloud is here, certainly at a consumer level. At a business level, it's gaining rapid momentum, as we shared earlier, in terms of just the pure volumes of the spend on cloud computing technology that we're seeing. Now, let's talk a little bit about, those are the benefits. The other side of the coin, of course, are some of the key risks that are associated with cloud computing. And I think that there are really, in my way of looking at things anyway, three key risks that often surface as really being the ones that businesses are most concerned about, and justifiably so. Their data security, system downtime, and what I'm calling commoditized IT access only. I'll explain more about what I mean by that in a few slides, but let's sort of take these risks one by one and just think about them for a moment. In terms of data security, obviously, there's a risk, or a perceived risk, I would suggest, more than a real risk in the cloud, that your data is not as secure as it is if it were located on servers or on hardware that was actually in your business, on your business premises. And I would say that, it depends on what data you're talking about. Clearly, there's some data that you just don't want stored in the cloud, although I would argue that that's becoming less and less as time goes on. It was once a very real concern, in security in terms of your data, but the reality is today that it's probably every bit as, if not in some cases much more secure in the cloud than it is if that data was located on servers in your businesses, given the differential safeguards and just basically the security that's been built into cloud computing and cloud applications. So it was once a very real concern. It gets less and less of a concern in real terms, in practical terms, I would suggest, with each passing day, even though the perceived risk may stay, may be greater. I think really, at this stage, data security as an issue with respect to cloud computing is probably far more perceived than real, almost in most cases at least. Let's talk a little bit about system downtime as well. because that's another clear risk in terms of cloud computing. I mean, what happens if I can't access my we're talking about technology, just regular traditional technology on premises, and of course everything grinds to a halt. Nobody can work. Everybody sort of walks around and wonders when the system is going to be up again. System downtime in any form is very, very disruptive. And there are recent incidents that I'm sure you're aware of that have RIM had a big outage not so very long ago, got a lot of publicity, and of course understandably so, because it's very disruptive when systems go down. But the fact of the matter is that that they're becoming increasingly, just because of my background, but I think of cloud computing in the same way as I think of bank card transactions, credit card transactions as an example. I mean, we use electronic payments all the time. It's almost to the point where cash accounts for a very small portion of all the transactions made. We do that because that system, the bank card, the credit card systems are just always available, or at least almost always available. System downtime is a concern, but again, the incidences of systems not being available, you not being able to access your applications or your data in the cloud, are becoming increasingly rare, and that risk declines over time. And it will. I would say also as a risk, at least as I see it, something that I'm calling commoditized IT. And often businesses will hesitate to buy a cloud application because it doesn't exactly look like, feel like, do exactly what their current software does. And there's some sense that that if you use a cloud computing application, you're giving up something to better compete. Now, and it's true that really, if you're consuming software in the cloud, you're consuming it as a utility. We mentioned that a moment ago, and that means you're pretty much consuming the same as everybody else. And the question that I really think has to be asked here is even if you don't get exactly what you've got today in the cloud, how much of that really matters? How much of what you have today in your software applications is really strategic to you? How much of it really makes a difference in terms of your ability to compete, or your ability to beat competitors, your ability to earn more revenue? And I would argue that of all the software that's consumed by businesses today, there's very little of it that is actually truly strategic, that truly drives some form of meaningful competitive advantage. The rest is a commodity, pretty much. And if you're consuming a commodity, much as electricity, you're far better off consuming it as a utility, where you get to pay as you go, pay for what you need, and not tie up capital. So from a strategic perspective, from the CFO, the CIO, or the CEO's perspective, really, the trick is to define what software you today consume, what technology you today consume and need that is really strategic. Keep that proprietary, keep that to yourself, arguably keep that on premises, if you will. But the stuff that's not strategic in any way can be far more cost effectively consumed in a cloud computing format. Now, let's talk a little bit about more specifically why it is that CIOs and CFOs arguably should be really interested in the cloud. And looking first of all at the CIO's perspective, the first thing that the cloud gives a chief information officer is a bigger bang for the IT buck. And we mentioned this in an earlier slide. The reason that's the case is that you get to spend more of your IT budget on innovation, on things that really drive the business forward, than you do on maintaining complex systems with expensive resources. It also gives you an ability to add agility to the organization if you leverage that sandbox that we were talking about a few slides ago. If your people are actually able to use software to improve business processes, for example, because they now have access to computing power that they didn't before, that they couldn't possibly have access to because it wasn't cost effective, You can make your organization more responsive. You can make your organization more agile, more successful, more competitive. And really, that's the key skill that the technology professional today has to, in my opinion anyway, learn. Because if they're counting on being able to maintain complex systems that are located on the premises of the organization, as those organizations move to cloud computing, those skills are going to become, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but certainly less important, far less important, and far less affordable, quite frankly. So the challenge from an IT professional's perspective is to change and adapt to be able to use technology to really make a difference in the business, as opposed to maintaining complex systems that have just grown up around the business, and there might be a sense that they can't be replaced, but the reality is they probably can, and they almost certainly will be at some point. And likely when that happens, it's going to be in a cloud computing format a lot of the time. And the last major thing that's in the cloud for the CIO is, at the end of the day, an ability to add competitive capacity to the organization. And to reduce the cost of IT so that the organization can devote more resources to expanding markets, building revenue, just being more successful as a commercial enterprise. That's what's in it. That's what's in it for the CIO. Now, for every benefit, there's a downside. So what's the downside from a CIO perspective? I think we need to really call a spade here. The trend, if you look at it from the perspective of, say shareholders all the way back to, boards of directors to the CEO, the objective here, the interest here in the cloud is to drive down IT costs. And that objective is achieved by transferring infrastructure to the cloud where it can be more cost-effectively. It's just a more cost-effective consumption format. And in many cases, this will mean eventually and probably inevitably a reduction in departmental headcount in IT departments, unless the people within those departments are able to adapt themselves to true business innovation, which I would argue, as a customer of IT, didn't always happen. In fact, happened surprisingly all too infrequently. If they're able to shift their focus and their skill set towards driving true business improvements through the use of enhanced computing power that's available in the cloud, then you can add business value. Then you can basically carve out a space for yourself in this sort of new world order, new cloud order. If you can't, you're going to be extremely challenged from a career perspective. Would be my suggestion. So it's likely to result in a lowering in IT expenditures, so that other areas of the organization can spend more or devote more resources towards building shareholder value, building revenue, building markets, those kinds of things. And especially now in the current economic environment with capital, very scarce and very hesitantly parted with by investors, by chief executive officers, understandably, swimming against the tide of a strong desire for cost reduction in the IT sphere is probably going to be a very difficult thing to do. That's the downside from the CIO's perspective. What about the CFO? Well, here's what's in the cloud for the CFO. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, you get to preserve capital for things that you can be pretty sure are going to directly generate revenue. Now, there are times when software can be demonstrated to do that. And if they can be demonstrated to do that, if you can present a compelling business case that says, this investment will yield this in the way of returns, then it's a capital investment that you can contemplate. But it's got stiffer competition these days, for sure. We have seen that across the board. And the CFO today is more concerned about capital preservation because in this economic environment, it's not something you can be frivolous with. You never could, really, but especially now, you have to be even more cautious about it. Second major thing that's in the cloud for the CFO is that you get to swap out fixed costs, which can really drag you down if you don't grow fast enough, for operating expenses or variable costs. So consuming IT in a cloud-based format means that you have operating expenses that can scale up or down with business volumes as you experience based on what happens in the market. Rather than having your, your future fixed, if you will, by having invested in a capital asset in the form of technology and then having to amortize that over a period of time, those costs are sunk. You don't get to reallocate that capital once it's spent. You're stuck with a level of fixed expenditures. You don't have to have that in a cloud-based computing format. Also, because you've got operating expenses as opposed to capital expenditures and amortization, you have cleaner balance sheets. It's just a healthier company. And those companies with cleaner balance sheets, we know, tend to be valued, well, they are inevitably all the time valued more highly in the market, and the market and investors determine who gets more capital, and so cleaner balance sheets really are a major concern for CFOs these days. And you get to lower your long-run cost structure as it relates to technology consumption because fundamentally of the scale efficiencies that you can gain in the cloud. That you, unless you were a very large enterprise, just didn't have available to you previously. That's what's in the cloud for the CFO. Now there are some downsides. There's always downsides. And from the CFO perspective, I think there's probably two main downsides that you need to be concerned with. The first is that in the short term at least, this is changing rapidly, but in the short term there are still relatively fewer cloud offerings, if you will, that are established and proven than there are traditional hardware and software combinations. So it'll take a while yet, but probably not that long a while, for the market to evolve to the point where you have really a robust set of cloud offerings that compete directly with the technology that you have historically consumed on premises. The other main downside for the CFO to be aware of is that technology suppliers themselves are transitioning their offerings from on-premises forms of technology to the cloud. And that delivers to them, that means to them certain cash flow implications and capital, and it strains their capitalization picture as well. So as suppliers transition to the cloud, they undergo a financial transition themselves, and it's not always going to be an easy financial transition for some of them. And from a CFO perspective, you obviously want to be doing business with those who will make that transition. You always want to be doing business with a stable, productive, secure, financially organization. Those are two key downsides with respect to cloud computing from the perspective of the CFO. Now, what I want to do quickly is run through with you here a specific example of a financial decision or a technology decision, and just sort of give you perhaps a more hands-on feel for the financial differences between buying a system that's cloud-based versus buying a system that is on-prem. Let's use this example. Just imagine you may be, in which case this is good. If you're not, just imagine that you were a mid-sized manufacturer, and it's come time to replace your accounting system, your ERP system. It's old, it's not being supported anymore, it's no longer adequate to fit your business needs, whatever the case may be, you need to replace it. And your basic question is, well, what are my alternatives? Is it going to be better for me to consume it in the cloud or elsewhere? And if you look at it, let's just take this as an example. This is an example of what this software, this technology might cost you if you consumed it in the same traditional way as you always have. Let's say you're 15 users, you're going to have software costs roughly, say, $2,500 per user. You're probably going to have to spend some amount in services. Typically, that's for every dollar in software you buy, you typically spend $1 to $2, sometimes even more dollars in services. So that 15-user system is probably going to cost you somewhere in the $45,000 range in terms of services. You're going to have ongoing software costs. There's always maintenance or enhancement that you have to pay. That's going to be roughly 20% of the initial licenses. You're also going to have to buy hardware. You're going to have some servers. You're going to have you're going to have some operating software, and that's probably going to be in the $30,000 to $35,000 range. Once that system's in, you're also going to have to support it. And that could take as much as 200 hours per year to support, sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average it's likely to fall somewhere in that ballpark. You're going to, if you outsource that, or if you have internal resources that are already doing that, then that's already a sunk cost, you could argue. But it is a real cost nonetheless. And if you have to outsource that, which more and more organizations have gone to outsourced IT models, that's probably going to cost you something in the range of 150 per hour. And if you just sort of think of this as a 5-year time frame from an investment standpoint, and say that, you know, cost of money is around 10%. I just picked that number because it's nice and round. I know it's lower than that today. So, but nonetheless, under those assumptions, here's what you would spend by buying that ERP system in the traditional format. You'd spend $37,500 in licenses. You'd spend $45,000 in services. You'd have maintenance costs of $7,500 per year. You'd have total admin and support costs of $30,000 per year. So you'd come up, you'd tie up $123,000 in capital, and over the course of the 5 years, between the maintenance on the software and the maintenance of the actual hardware and infrastructure itself, you'd probably spend over $300,000 on that system. And if you crunch that back, just sort of take that $300,000 and divide it by the number of users, which is 15, and you know, straight line over 5 years, that's $337 per user per month. If you sort of applied some value to the opportunity cost of that money that you're investing at 10% as a cost of funds, you're probably talking about a cost in the 425, 430 range per user per month if you do that math. When you get right down to it, you know, that's what your system's costing you if you purchase it in an on-premise format. Now, if you look at a cloud alternative, you will find that the alternatives are often significantly lower. So you'll find those that you can probably consume if they fit your needs for as little as 150, 175 per user per month. Sometimes even lower, actually. That's a significant difference in terms of what you're spending over a 5-year period. Now, you may need some services to adapt that cloud-based base product, if you will, to fit your needs, and that could involve some initial expenses. Although, so it would make it more expensive, but it's still likely going to turn out to be less over a 5-year period of time. And it's obviously going to be even more attractive to the degree that you don't need many services in this, which increasingly, you know, we're finding to be the case. These offerings are becoming more and more complete as we go forward. So that's just a concrete example of some of the cost savings that you can achieve. Rather than tying up $120,000, $130,000 in capital and spending $300,000 in total over the course of a 5-year period, you could spend, you know, perhaps as much as, or perhaps as little as half of that in a cloud computing environment. That's a significant cost differential. Very hard to not consider, and very hard to not consider quite seriously. Now, just before we move on to any questions that you may have, I wanted to just sort of share with you, if you will, some final sort of cloud comments and observations. And the first is really that it's sometimes difficult in the cloud to compare apples to apples. And in many ways, you have to sort of, you know, pick through the basket of fruit, if you will, figure out which is an apple, which is an orange, which is a grapefruit, whatever. And one of the key things that makes it difficult often to compare apples to apples is that traditional software offerings often have far more functionality associated with them in comparison to cloud offerings. So cloud offerings tend to be far more focused and precise in terms of what they do. If that is the most part of what you need to get done, and you know, the argument here is that, you know, out of the box, or they're like 80% or 85% of what you need done is contained in 20% of the functionality, or 25% of the functionality. If you've purchased any major technology systems over the years at all, you can really relate to that comment, I know, because that's often what you end up experiencing. And so it seems to you, and it in many cases really is, as a consumer of technology, that traditional software offerings are really bloated in terms of the functionality that you really need. There's more functionality there than you really need. And if you don't need it, why are you paying for it? Nonetheless, often what will happen is that cloud offerings will look to be far less substantial than traditional software offerings. And my argument would be, even if it's less substantial, if it's what you need, and if it does all you need it to do, and it's far cheaper. And you can scale it, you can buy more or buy less as you need to. You don't have to tie up capital. Why do you need it? I mean, less is more in today's business environment, as we know. And this sort of dynamic is particularly true for business applications, such as enterprise resource planning or ERP software, or customer relationship management or CRM software. And in order to really, so at the bottom line, in order to make sure that you're comparing, you may not even end up comparing apples to apples. You may be comparing an apple to an orange. The question is, what do you really need? What functionality do you really need? What functionality do you really use? Does the cloud offering have that? If so, it's likely going to be far more cost effective for you to consume it in that way. And the second, another sort of comment would be, this is for business applications. Those that previous comment. For basic desktop and productivity tools, the days of having servers on premises and being maintained by local service providers, I would argue, are fading very, very fast. There's no particular reason that infrastructure can't be located in the cloud, accessed in the cloud, and far more effectively and cost effectively than it is today. It's just, so, and you can often achieve, as a CIO and a CFO, pretty significant cost savings pretty immediately by shifting a lot of the maintenance of your desktop and productivity tools to the cloud. And the final cloud comment that I would make is that really looking forward for those in the IT world particularly, the real power in terms of the future potential lies in the ability to cheaply access computing power that you otherwise previously could not have ever afforded. And here's an example. If you think of a manufacturer distributor and they're faced with scheduling, complex scheduling decisions and equations on a daily basis. If they had a scheduling system similar to what's used by airlines, for example, to schedule planes, given all the variables and disruptions that they can encounter, as any manufacturer distributor, by the way, also does in different ways. What difference would that make to the business? Would they be more efficient? Well, of course they would, if they had access to the computing power that allowed them to have those kinds of scheduling systems. And that computing power, the point is available in the cloud, and it will be relatively cheap. So that's really I think where the true leverage lies. Now, just a couple of closing comments before I take questions, if there are any. The example that I gave a few moments ago of the ERP or accounting system is driven by a total cost of ownership calculator. That's available. You can find out more about it, if you will, if you want to, on our website, Software Think Tank. That's the location. And then finally, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. If you have any questions later on, that's great too. We'd love to hear from you, and you can use, in that case, our Q&A section on Software Think Tank, which is the address there. So, let's see. There's a
Joe Think Tank. The mics have been unmuted, so if anyone would like to have a question by audio, you can just enable your mic and ask the question freely, or you can also use the question and answer at the bottom of yours.
Okay. Roman asks, have you considered downtime costs? And then I can't see the rest of the question, unfortunately. I don't know, Erica, can you see that?
Yes, it's have you considered downtime costs, especially when the internet is down? People may not be able to.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, that is a risk. That is one of the major risks in terms of cloud computing. And in order to really assess the downtime costs, you obviously have to consider how often it happens. Now, when it happens, it's significant and it's expensive, obviously. The question is, how often does it happen? And it is, I would argue, it doesn't happen often. If you look at most of the cloud computing systems out there, they have performance guarantees, and the uptime is, like the bare minimum sort of standard expectation is 99.9% of the time. That 0.1% of the time when they may be down, is expensive. But I don't think it really takes away from the core financial argument that is still, like it's disruptive if it occurs, but it occurs very infrequently, and I don't think it really takes away from the core financial argument that cloud computing has to offer in terms of benefits. Erica, I'm going to go back to there's a question from Colin here in terms of the TCO calculator URL again. There it is. You can.
We're just about 2 minutes over, Joe, I think, so we could wrap up the call. We'll have this available on demand for anyone that's interested, and they can use the Q&A question of Software Think Tank to ask further questions about this webinar in particular.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your attendance today and your attention. Hope it was useful. And we hope to hear from you in the future.